When cops slammed a little boy into the pavement, they thought they were teaching a lesson. Instead, they lit the fuse on a war that would bring a ghost out of retirement and bury them all. They told him he was nobody, seconds before putting their knee on his 7-year-old son's back. What they didn't know was that they had just awakened the most lethal Delta Force operative in history. The late afternoon sun slanted across the rooftops of Oak Ridge Heights, painting the neat rows of houses in gold. Isaac Carter guided his black SUV into the driveway of his 2-story home, the quiet hum of the engine fading into the suburban stillness. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who had found peace. A pressed shirt, loosened tie, briefcase resting on the passenger seat, just another successful professional coming home from work. Only those who knew his history, those few who still whispered the name Ghost, understood how far from ordinary this picture really was. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the house. A modest place, nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention. That was the point. He had built a life here brick by brick, routine by routine, until the rhythm of suburbia had almost drowned out the echoes of gunfire in his memory. Almost. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, feeling the flecks of gray that had come with age, and allowed himself a small smile. 5:30, right on time for dinner. Elijah would be waiting. As he stepped out, Mrs. Wilson was already at her porch across the street, a ball of yarn in her lap. Her hands were gnarled with age, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. "Right on the dot, Mr. Carter," she called, her voice warm but tinged with that knowing weight older folks carried. Isaac gave her a nod. "Routine's important, Mrs. Wilson." She chuckled, leaning on her cane. For some, more than others. He knew she had seen more than she ever spoke aloud. A Navy nurse in another life, she recognized the discipline in him, the way he scanned the street before walking to his door, the subtle tension in his shoulders. She never pressed, never asked, but he suspected she knew pieces of what he had been. She was one of the few people he trusted to watch Elijah when work ran late. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of fresh paint and old wood. The house had a lived-in feel, Elijah's shoes abandoned by the door, a jacket draped over the banister, the sound of laughter drifting faintly from the backyard. Isaac loosened his tie and changed into jeans and a navy Henley, the sort of comfort clothes that meant home. He glanced out the kitchen window and found Elijah chasing a ball across the lawn, his laughter ringing like bells. At 7, Elijah was all motion and curiosity, a child who asked endless questions and loved to test how far he could run before someone called him back. Watching him now, Isaac felt the same warmth he had the first time he held the boy in his arms. Every choice he'd made since leaving the military, the long nights, the discipline to stay in control, the building of his security firm, had been for Elijah, to give him what Isaac had never had: stability, safety, innocence. He stepped onto the back porch. "Dinner in 20, champ," he called. Elijah turned, face bright, curls bouncing as he ran back toward the porch. "Got it, Dad. One more goal first." He kicked the ball with triumphant energy, chasing it down the grass. Isaac leaned on the railing, arms crossed, watching with a half smile. The boy's joy was infectious, but in the back of his mind the habits never stopped. He measured sightlines, cataloged the parked cars that didn't belong, listened for sounds out of place. Even here, even now, he couldn't silence the ghost completely. At night, while Elijah slept, he trained in the basement, shadowboxing in the dark, running drills until sweat poured down his back. And twice a year, he drove out to a storage unit on the edge of town where crates of gear waited, untouched but never forgotten. Insurance against a world that had taught him safety was always temporary. Elijah skidded to a stop at the porch steps, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. "Did you see that? That was pro level." Isaac ruffled his hair, laughing softly. "Pretty close, buddy, but you've got to work on your form." "Maybe you can train me," Elijah said, breathless. For a heartbeat, the words hit Isaac harder than they should have. Train him, like he'd trained a dozen young operators, men who hadn't all lived to see their 30s. He forced the thought away and smiled. "We'll start with soccer before special ops." Mrs. Wilson appeared at the gate, gathering her knitting bag. "He was good as gold today, Mr. Carter. Homework's done, even the extra problems. Sharp as a tack, that one." "Just like his mother," Isaac said softly, the shadow of memory flickering across his face before he smoothed it away. Mrs. Wilson gave him a look that held understanding and something like warning. "Don't forget, even in quiet streets, storms can come quick." He inclined his head, accepting the wisdom. "We'll be ready." As dusk fell and the streetlights blinked awake, the Carter household glowed with ordinary warmth. Dinner cooking, Elijah's chatter filling the rooms, laughter echoing in corners once too silent. It looked like safety, sounded like peace, felt like a life rebuilt. But behind Isaac's calm eyes, The ghost still lingered, coiled like a shadow, waiting for the day it might be called again. And somewhere, unseen in the distance, that day was already on its way. The next evening bled into gold as the sun sank low, washing Oak Ridge Heights in warm light that made the street look like a postcard. Isaac stood at the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables for dinner. The smell of sizzling garlic and onions filled the room, blending with the faint sound of Elijah's laughter from the front yard. It was one of those rare, perfect moments, simple, domestic, the kind he wished could last forever. Then the sound came, not laughter, a shout, sharp, panicked, cut off. Isaac's head snapped up, the knife still in his hand. His body knew before his mind caught up. Every nerve in him went cold and alert. He was moving before the cutting board even stopped spinning on the counter. He hit the front door at a run. Outside, the world had tilted into nightmare. Elijah was face down on the street, his small arms pinned behind his back. A stocky police officer with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses knelt on the boy's spine, his knee grinding into the thin frame. Elijah's blue ball lay abandoned at the curb, still rolling. "Stay down," the officer barked, pressing harder. Elijah whimpered, the sound slicing through Isaac like a blade. The neighbors had started to gather, faces peeking from porches, someone recording on a phone. A second man stood nearby, older, broader, wearing plain clothes and a detective's badge. His expression was almost bored, as though this were just another box to check on his evening shift. Isaac's voice cut the air, low and deadly. "Get your hands off my son." The cop on Elijah didn't move. "This your kid?" he said without looking up. "Then maybe teach him not to run at police vehicles." The detective stepped forward, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Stand back, sir. We've got this under control." Isaac's steps were slow, deliberate, hands open, visible, his body radiating the kind of quiet danger that made trained men take a step back without realizing why. "My 7-year-old son was retrieving a ball," he said evenly. "You're going to remove your knee from his back right now." For a long moment, no one moved. Elijah's breathing came in shallow gasps. Then, almost reluctantly, the cop, Reynolds, his name tag read, shifted his weight and hauled Elijah to his feet. Roughly, too roughly. The boy yanked free and bolted to Isaac, clutching his father's leg, sobbing. Isaac crouched, one hand on Elijah's head, the other lifting the hem of his shirt. Red marks bloomed across his son's ribs, angry and deep. Something inside Isaac went very still. "Name and badge number," he said, not raising his voice but making it impossible not to obey. The detective, Connor, smirked. "Listen, buddy, we're just doing our job. Maybe teach your kid some respect for law enforcement." Isaac rose slowly, towering over both men now, his presence suddenly far larger than his frame. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried like a gunshot. "Respect is earned. Name and badge number. Now." Connor's smirk faltered. "Detective Brian Connor, badge 8734. This is Officer Jake Reynolds, badge 6219. Connor leaned in just slightly, dropping his voice so only Isaac could hear. "And you? You're nobody. Remember that." The threat hung in the air. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered under their breath. Isaac didn't blink. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said softly, so quiet the words were almost swallowed by the gathering dusk. Reynolds' smirk broke first, the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. Connor only smiled thinly, tapped his partner on the shoulder, and they returned to their cruiser. The engine roared to life, and with a squeal of tires, they were gone. Isaac stood in the street. Elijah pressed against him, shaking. He could feel the boy's heartbeat hammering like a trapped bird. "Daddy, why did they hurt me?" Elijah's voice was small, broken. Isaac had no easy answer. He looked up at the neighbors, at the witnesses holding phones, at the wide-eyed fear in their faces. And for the first time in years, the ghost inside him stirred fully awake. From somewhere down the block, a dark sedan pulled away from the curb. No headlights, no plates. Inside, behind tinted glass, someone watched through binoculars and made a call. "Test complete," a voice said on the other end. Carter's response was, "Interesting." By the time Isaac carried Elijah inside, the quiet suburban evening was gone. The street looked the same, the houses still stood, the sky still glowed soft with sunset, but something had changed. The thin layer of peace Isaac had built over his life had been ripped away, exposing the steel beneath. And somewhere far from this quiet neighborhood, people who thought they understood violence were about to learn the terrible truth. You never provoke a man who mastered it. then chose to walk away. Tonight, the ghost was awake. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the hospital room. Elijah lay on the narrow bed, dwarfed by the crisp white sheets, his little chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. His curls were mussed, his cheek pressed against the pillow, and even in sleep his small hand gripped Isaac's thumb with a desperate strength. The detective stepped forward, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Stand back, sir. We've got this under control." Isaac's steps were slow, deliberate, hands open, visible, his body radiating the kind of quiet danger that made trained men take a step back without realizing why. "My 7-year-old son was retrieving a ball," he said evenly. "You're going to remove your knee from his back right now." For a long moment, no one moved. Elijah's breathing came in shallow gasps. Then, almost reluctantly, the cop, Reynolds, his name tag read, shifted his weight and hauled Elijah to his feet. Roughly, too roughly. The boy yanked free and bolted to Isaac, clutching his father's leg, sobbing. Isaac crouched, one hand on Elijah's head, the other lifting the hem of his shirt. Red marks bloomed across his son's ribs, angry and deep. Something inside Isaac went very still. "Name and badge number," he said, not raising his voice but making it impossible not to obey. The detective, Connor, smirked. "Listen, buddy, we're just doing our job. Maybe teach your kids some respect for law enforcement." Isaac rose slowly, towering over both men now, his presence suddenly far larger than his frame. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried like a gunshot. "Respect is earned. Name and badge number. Now." Connor's smirk faltered. "Detective Brian Connor, badge 8734. This is Officer Jake Reynolds, badge 6219. Connor leaned in just slightly, dropping his voice so only Isaac could hear. "And you? You're nobody. Remember that." The threat hung in the air. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered under their breath. Isaac didn't blink. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said softly, so quiet the words were almost swallowed by the gathering dusk. Reynolds' smirk broke first, the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. Connor only smiled, thinly, tapped his partner on the shoulder, and they returned to their cruiser. The engine roared to life, and with a squeal of tires they were gone. Isaac stood in the street. Elijah pressed against him, shaking. He could feel the boy's heartbeat hammering like a trapped bird. "Daddy, why did they hurt me?" Elijah's voice was small, broken. Isaac had no easy answer. He looked up at the neighbors, at the witnesses holding phones, at the wide-eyed fear in their faces. And for the first time in years, the ghost inside him stirred fully awake. From somewhere down the block, a dark sedan pulled away from the curb. No headlights, no plates. Inside, behind tinted glass, someone watched through binoculars and made a call. "Test complete," a voice said on the other end. Carter's response was, "Interesting." By the time Isaac carried Elijah inside, the quiet suburban evening was gone. The street looked the same, the houses still stood, the sky still glowed soft with sunset, but something had changed. The thin layer of peace Isaac had built over his life had been ripped away, exposing the steel beneath. And somewhere far from this quiet neighborhood, people who thought they understood violence were about to learn the terrible truth. You never provoke a man who mastered it, then chose to walk away. Tonight, the ghost was awake. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the hospital room. Elijah lay on the narrow bed, dwarfed by the crisp white sheets, his little chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. His curls were mussed, his cheek pressed against the pillow, and even in sleep his small hand gripped Isaac's thumb with a desperate strength. Dr. Sarah Wells stood at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand, her face composed but not unkind. "He has a mild concussion," she said softly, "some bruising to his ribs and back and a few abrasions. Physically he'll recover quickly. Children are resilient." Her voice dipped lower, her expression grave. "But the emotional trauma—" "I understand," Isaac said, his voice even but clipped. She hesitated before continuing. "We have a child psychologist on staff. I'd recommend—" "Not yet." The answer came too fast, too sharp. Dr. Wells studied him a moment, then nodded. "I'll leave you with him. Press the call button if you need anything." When the door shut behind her, Isaac leaned back in the chair and stared at the sleeping boy. For a long time, he didn't move, barely breathed, as though afraid to disturb him. Then the rage came. It didn't roar. It didn't scream. It slid over him like black ice, cold and absolute. His hand tightened on the armrest until the wood creaked. His pulse slowed, not quickened. The part of himself he had buried, the man trained to do terrible things with perfect precision, opened its eyes. He stayed until Elijah stirred and whimpered softly, smoothing the boy's hair until he settled again. Then Isaac rose. Quietly, deliberately, he kissed his son's forehead and left the room. The hallway was empty. The security camera above the nurse's station swiveled lazily. Isaac didn't look at it. In the parking garage, he slid into his SUV and sat for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he reached beneath the driver's seat and pulled out a small black case. Inside was a laptop, encrypted, hardened, built for exactly the kind of work he had promised himself he was done with. But tonight, promises meant nothing. By the time he pulled into his office at Sentinel Solutions, the building was empty. He locked the doors, killed the security cameras, and went to the reinforced room in the basement that his employees thought was just a secure server vault. The lights flickered on to reveal a steel table, racks of equipment, a wall-mounted monitor. Isaac placed the laptop on the table, powered it up, and inserted a slim drive from around his neck, his go-bag digital key, the one he had told himself he'd never use again. Lines of code filled the screen as he bypassed firewalls and piggybacked on city infrastructure. It took him 9 minutes to breach the police department's network, 2 more to access internal complaint records, and less than 30 seconds to find Reynolds' file. 32 civilian complaints, 10 use-of-force incidents, all buried, all dismissed. Connor's file was worse, spotless on paper, but Isaac found what wasn't supposed to be there. Encrypted emails, offshore deposits, communications flagged with a single letter, V. He froze them all on screen, his reflection staring back at him in the monitor's glow. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was deliberate. He opened a secure window and began compiling a dossier. Every complaint, every suspicious transfer, every scrap of data that painted the picture he needed. But it wasn't enough to know. He needed leverage. 2 hours later, he parked a block away from Reynolds' apartment complex. The night was quiet, the air cold enough to bite. Isaac moved like a shadow, gliding through the lot, disabling the building's cheap security cameras with a signal jammer as he passed. He found Reynolds' car easily, a scuffed patrol SUV with a dented fender. In under 2 minutes, he had placed a military-grade tracker under the chassis, cloned the officer's phone, and vanished back into the darkness. Connor's house was harder, a surprisingly expensive home in a neighborhood well above a detective's pay grade. Isaac bypassed the alarm with a bypass key most burglars didn't even know existed and slipped inside. The air smelled faintly of bourbon and expensive cologne. He moved room to room with the grace of a predator, photographing files, copying data from a personal laptop, opening drawers and replacing them exactly as he'd found them. In the study, he discovered something that stopped him cold, a manila folder marked Asset Acquisition. Inside were photographs of several men and women, each one labeled with a status: recruited, pending, eliminated, and at the bottom of the stack, a surveillance photo of him. Isaac stared at it for a long moment, then slid it into his own pocket before leaving. By dawn, he was back at Sentinel Solutions, the data spread across his screen like a map of rot. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders coiled tight as a bowstring. He didn't just see 2 bad cops anymore. He saw a network, a machine, that had deliberately targeted his son to test him. The ghost wasn't just awake now. He was hunting. He sent the first package anonymously at 6:42 a.m., a dossier of Reynolds' misconduct to 3 journalists, the mayor's office, and the police chief. Then he sent a single text to Connor's phone through a secure, spoofed line. "You touched my son. Now I'm coming for everything." Across the city, Connor sat up in bed, the phone buzzing in his hand, sweat breaking across his forehead. He had no idea that his life, and everything he thought he controlled, had just been put on a countdown clock. Night fell over the city like a slow-closing fist. Isaac sat alone in his office, the glow of multiple monitors painting his face in blue light. On the screens, real-time feeds from hacked security cameras tracked Officer Reynolds as he left a corner bar, climbed into his cruiser, and sat there for 10 full minutes before starting the engine. His movements were jittery, unfocused. Isaac watched with a predator's patience. Every data point was a puzzle piece, every heartbeat bringing him closer to understanding the shape of what he was dealing with. Reynolds had spent the evening drinking heavily, credit card transactions confirmed, and his hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. Isaac sent the first message at exactly 11:03 p.m., A single photo delivered to Reynolds' phone. Reynolds himself, asleep in his own bed the night before. A second later, another message followed. I could have killed you 16 different ways. This is your only warning. Run. Through the hacked dashcam feed, Isaac watched the man go pale. The cruiser's engine revved, then stalled as Reynolds fumbled the keys. When he finally got the car moving, he blew through 2 stop signs before pulling into his apartment complex. He spent the night pacing, blinds snapping open every few minutes, weapon in hand. Across town, Detective Connor was harder to rattle. He arrived home late, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and sat in a leather armchair scrolling through his phone. He read Isaac's message. You touched my son, now I'm coming for everything, and then smirked as if amused. But at 2:14 a.m., when Isaac triggered the smart speaker in Connor's living room to play the sound of a child's laughter, Elijah's laughter, recorded from Isaac's home security system, the smirk vanished. Connor dropped the glass, whiskey spreading like a stain across the rug. By dawn, the psychological pressure was in full swing. Isaac had leaked another packet, this time to an internal affairs contact he trusted from his military days, containing a curated selection of Reynolds' worst complaints. It would take hours to process, but once it hit the chief's desk, the fallout would be inevitable. Meanwhile, he dug deeper into Connor's encrypted emails. Buried in the chain of communications was a name that stopped him cold. Victor Langley. General Victor Langley. Isaac leaned back in his chair, the name pulling a thread from deep in his past. Langley had been his commanding officer in Delta Force, a man who had once called Isaac his best operative, who had signed off on some of the most classified missions of the last decade. He had retired years ago under mysterious circumstances, and now he was sending money to a mid-level detective in a small city police department. Isaac traced the wire transfers back to a shell corporation based overseas, then to another, until the trail ended in an offshore bank known for laundering government black ops funds. Whatever Langley was building, it wasn't small. At 5:45 a.m., Isaac stood at his kitchen window sipping black coffee, watching the street outside with calm eyes. Elijah was still asleep upstairs. The quiet suburban street looked exactly as it had the night before. But Isaac felt the shift, deep in his bones. The world had changed. Across town, Reynolds woke to find a small box on his doorstep. Inside was a photograph, a close-up of his own service weapon, disassembled, laid out on his kitchen counter. He hadn't heard a sound all night. The message was clear. I can reach you anytime, anywhere. Reynolds called Connor, panic in his voice. He's inside my head, Brian. He's inside my house. Get a grip, Connor growled, but Isaac had already hacked into the call, listening to every word. You don't get it, Reynolds shouted. This guy's not normal. He's military, but special forces maybe. I've seen guys like this overseas. If we don't stop him... Connor cut him off. Nobody's stopping him. Not yet. Orders were to apply pressure and observe. We do our job, we get paid. Simple as that. There was a pause. Then Reynolds asked, voice low, what if we push too far? Connor didn't answer. That night, Isaac drove to the storage unit on the edge of town. The lock clicked open, and the smell of oiled metal greeted him. The crates waited, untouched for years. He ran a hand over the cold steel of a tactical vest, then opened a case to reveal a suppressed pistol perfectly maintained. He strapped on the vest, holstered the weapon, and stood for a moment in the dim light. His reflection caught in the mirror on the wall. The man staring back at him wasn't the CEO of Sentinel Solutions. He wasn't a suburban dad, he was Ghost, and Ghost was going hunting. As Isaac left the facility, a dark sedan idled 2 blocks away, headlights off. Inside, a man with a scarred face raised binoculars and followed him until he vanished into the night. Package confirmed, the man said into a secure phone. He's active. Tell Langley the Ghost is back in play. Somewhere far from the quiet streets of Oak Ridge Heights, Victor Langley received the message and smiled grimly. Good, he said. Then phase 2 begins. Rain-slicked streets glistened under the glow of streetlights as Isaac's SUV turned down the narrow road leading to Oak Ridge Elementary. He'd left work early for once, eager to pick up Elijah himself and take I'm for their traditional Friday milkshakes. It had been 3 days since the incident with Reynolds and Connor, and although Isaac had seen the fear blooming in Reynolds and the tightening paranoia in Connor, part of him wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could return to normal. Then he saw the van. A dark, windowless panel van sat idling too close to the school's back entrance, engine running, no plates. Every instinct in Isaac's body screamed wrong. He was out of the SUV before it had fully stopped. moving with the silent fluidity that had once made him a ghost story among warlords. From the corner of the building, he saw them, 3 men in tactical jackets moving toward the back gate, one carrying a duffel bag heavy enough to sag in his grip. They weren't cops. Their movements were too clean, too disciplined, military or ex-military, and not the kind on anyone's payroll that came with oversight. "Elijah," Isaac breathed, already sprinting. He reached the gate just as the first man clipped the lock with bolt cutters. Isaac didn't hesitate. His shoulder hit the man like a battering ram, dropping him instantly. The duffel went skidding across the pavement, spilling zip ties, duct tape, and a sedative injector. The second man drew a pistol. Isaac closed the distance before the muzzle cleared the holster, slamming him against the chain-link fence with bone-cracking force. The third swung a baton, catching Isaac across the ribs. Pain exploded, but he turned with the blow, grabbed the man's wrist, and snapped it with surgical precision. The man dropped, screaming. "Federal agent, drop it!" The voice came from behind, sharp and commanding. Isaac spun, weapon raised, then froze. Agent Olivia Park stood there, gun leveled, badge out. Her hair was plastered to her face by the rain, her eyes calm but locked on him. "Stand down, Carter," she said. "I've got the perimeter." For a long moment, Isaac considered whether to trust her. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. Park moved in, cuffed the 2 surviving men with practiced speed, and kicked away their weapons. "You're lucky I was already tailing them," she said. "Otherwise you'd be explaining 3 corpses to the school board right now." "Who are they?" Isaac demanded, scanning the van. "Contractors," Park said grimly. "Langley's people, hired through a shell company. I've been tracking his operation for months. Weapons, private security, intelligence assets. He's building something ugly, and now he's escalated. Your son is the leverage." Isaac's jaw tightened until it ached. Then Langley just declared war. Park held his gaze for a long moment, rain running down her face. "War's already here," she said quietly, "and you just fired the first shot." They hustled Elijah out moments later, the boy wide-eyed but unhurt. Isaac crouched to meet his gaze. "Are you okay, buddy?" Elijah nodded, but his small hand clutched Isaac's sleeve with white-knuckled force. "They tried to grab me, Dad," he whispered. "They won't," Isaac said, voice low and deadly. "Not ever again." That night, Isaac sent Elijah to stay with Mrs. Wilson while he went home. The house was too quiet, every creak of the floorboards a warning. He stripped off his shirt and examined the bruises spreading across his ribs. The man in the mirror looked like someone he used to know, someone he had tried to bury. Then came the sound. Glass shattering. The first shot tore through the living room window, spraying shards across the floor. Isaac dropped instantly, rolling behind the kitchen island as a second burst of gunfire chewed through the wall where he'd been standing. They were here. 6 men. He counted their footfalls, their angles of approach, their overlapping fields of fire. Former special operators, Langley's best. Isaac reached into the cabinet under the sink, pulling free the small case he kept there for emergencies. The pistol felt like an extension of his hand as he chambered the first round. The back door exploded inward. Isaac shot the first man through the throat before he cleared the threshold. He pivoted, double-tapping the second in the chest as he came through the hallway. The kitchen filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. Another attacker tried the front window. Isaac flipped the table for cover, waited until the man's shadow crossed the frame, then put a bullet through the glass. The remaining 3 tried to flank him. Isaac moved through his own house like a shadow, every step precise, every angle calculated. The 4th man died silently in the laundry room, knife through the base of his skull. The 5th went down in the hallway after a brutal hand-to-hand exchange that left blood spattered across the family photos. The 6th made it as far as the back porch before Isaac dropped him with a clean headshot. 6 minutes, 6 men. Silence. Isaac stood in the wreckage of his home, chest heaving, pistol smoking in his hand. The ghost had returned, and this time there was no putting him back in the ground. By the time Park arrived with backup, the bodies were gone, moved, cleaned, vanished without a trace. Isaac stood on the front lawn, rain running down his face, watching the flashing lights of approaching sirens. "They came to my house," he said simply. Park took in the bullet holes, the beat, loot on the tiles, the shattered windows. "Then we don't wait anymore," she said. "We hit them first." Isaac turned toward her, eyes hard and cold. "Not just hit them, we take them apart, piece by piece." And somewhere, far away in a command room buried beneath layers of security, Victor Langley watched the grainy satellite feed of Isaac's house and smiled. "Good," Langley said softly. "Now he remembers what he is." The barn smelled of oil, gunmetal, and rain-soaked earth. Isaac stood at the center of it, the tactical table glowing faintly with maps, schematics, and surveillance feeds. Around him stood 5 figures, men and women he trusted with his life, the last survivors of the most feared Delta Force unit of their era. Miles, his scarred second-in-command. Jennifer, the team's sniper and intelligence wizard. Diego, demolitions. Tyler, tech and comms. And Agent Olivia Park standing slightly apart, arms folded, her FBI windbreaker exchanged for tactical black. "This isn't an op," Isaac said, his voice low but carrying. "This is personal. Langley crossed the line when he came after my son. He thinks he can break me. Instead, we break him. Tonight." Miles nodded once. "Then let's do it right." They spent hours refining the plan. A coordinated strike on 3 of Langley's key assets. His weapons depot on the harbor, his money laundering front downtown, and the communications hub that tied his network together. Phase 1 was destruction. Phase 2 was exposure. Phase 3 was Langley himself. By nightfall, the storm had rolled in. Rain hammered the city, washing the streets clean and masking the team's movements. At precisely 0100 hours, the first strike hit. Diego's explosives turned the harbor warehouse into a fireball that lit the sky, sending black smoke billowing for miles. Simultaneously, Jennifer's suppressed rifle took out the guards at the comms hub while Tyler injected malicious code into their servers, wiping months of data and rerouting every scrap of intelligence directly to Isaac's encrypted network. By the time the police and fire crews arrived, the team was gone, leaving chaos in their wake. Langley's network reeled. Within hours, the response came. The city turned hostile. Roads were closed under the pretense of public safety. Surveillance drones began sweeping neighborhoods. Connor and Reynolds were pulled off active duty and disappeared, not into custody, but into Langley's private security detail. At dawn, Park came running into the command barn, rain still in her hair. "We've got chatter," she said, breathless. "Langley's fortified his main command center, an old military installation outside the city. He's calling in everyone, contractors, ex-military, even some federal contacts. Whatever he's planning, he's doing it there." "Then that's where we end this," Isaac said. They prepped in silence, guns oiled, magazines loaded, comms synced. The rain hadn't stopped, but it didn't matter. Isaac checked his gear one last time, then knelt in front of Elijah where Mrs. Wilson stood watching, stoic and calm. "I need you to be brave one more time, buddy," Isaac said. Elijah nodded solemnly, his small hand gripping Isaac's with a strength that surprised him. "You'll come back, right?" Isaac swallowed the lump in his throat. "I promise." Miles waited until they were outside before speaking. "You sure about this?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "He can. I to my house, Miles. Tonight, we go to his." The fortress loomed like a scar in the earth, a massive underground bunker surrounded by chain-link fences, floodlights, and armed patrols. Through thermal scopes, Isaac counted at least 30 men, plus automated defense systems. "This place is a fortress in every sense of the word," Jennifer whispered over comms. "Then we ghost in," Isaac replied. Using an abandoned storm drain as an entry point, the team infiltrated the compound. Tyler bypassed the first layer of security with a grin. 3-year-old firmware, he murmured. Might as well have left the door open. They moved like shadows through narrow tunnels until they emerged into the main underground hallways. The first guards went down without a sound, knives flashing in the dark. Jennifer picked off sentries from hidden alcoves, each shot silent and surgical. Then the alarm tripped. Floodlights blazed, sirens howled. The fortress came alive with the sound of boots and gunfire. "Contact left," Miles barked, dropping 2 men with controlled bursts. The firefight was brutal, claustrophobic. Isaac moved at the front, a whirlwind of controlled violence, one moment firing, the next grappling an attacker to the floor, breaking his neck with a sharp twist. The ghost wasn't just back, he was unstoppable. They reached the command center doors, steel reinforced, sealed from within. "Blow it," Isaac ordered. Diego set the charges, and with a deafening crack, the doors blew inward, smoke rolling through the corridor. Inside stood Victor Langley. He hadn't aged a day in Isaac's memory. Tall, silver-haired, still carrying himself with the posture of a general. Behind him, monitors flickered with live satellite feeds and tactical data. "I knew you'd come," Langley said calmly, as though greeting an old comrade. "You were always my best." "You used my son," Isaac said, his voice cold enough to freeze steel. "A necessary test," Langley replied without flinching, "to see if the ghost still lived, and he does." Isaac raised his weapon. "Then you already know how this ends." Before he could fire, Langley gestured, and the monitors switched to a live feed of Elijah, asleep in Mrs. Wilson's safe house. "You kill me," Langley said softly, "and the boy dies within the hour. I have contingencies, people you don't even know about." Isaac's finger hovered on the trigger. Every muscle screamed to pull it. Then Park stepped forward, weapon trained on Langley. "Your network's gone," she said. "Your money, your weapons, your comms, burned. You have no leverage." Langley's smirk faltered. At that moment, the sound of boots echoed in the hallway. A second team flooded in, black-clad, weapons raised, but they weren't Langley's men. "Room secure," barked Colonel Frank Harris, Isaac's former CO, stepping into view. "Langley, you're under arrest for treason." Langley's composure finally cracked as Harris's men restrained him. Isaac lowered his weapon slowly. His chest rose and fell, adrenaline still surging, but for the first time in days, the air felt clear. "It's over," Harris said quietly. Isaac looked around the room, at the shattered screens, the smoldering wreckage, the broken network Langley had built. Then he looked at Miles, at Park, at the men and women who had followed him here. "No," Isaac said, voice low and certain. "This was just the first battle." He holstered his weapon. "But we're done running. From now on, we take the fight to them." Outside, as the rain turned to mist and the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Isaac Carter stood at the mouth of the fortress, breathing deep. He wasn't just the ghost anymore. He was something far more dangerous. And somewhere in the shadows, the rest of Langley's backers, the board, the faceless men who had funded him, watched the live feed and realized what they had created: a legend, a reckoning, and he was coming for them next.